Hey, go back with me in time a little bit, and what happened? Hamas went into Israel. They kill over 1,000 innocents, complete slaughter, rape and pillage, take prisoners, and then Israel, of course, retaliates. They go in and they attack Hamas and go into the Palestinian areas. What was the response in the U.S.? What did you see specifically around the top U.S. schools? Well, you saw tent cities go up everywhere, and each tent city had all the same color tents, same placards, same phrases over and over across the U.S. in the top schools. You ever think about that? Favorite phrase of mine is follow the money, and there is a hidden illegal connection with money coming from the Middle East into the top schools that is buying them influence and buying radicalized students. Stay tuned. I'm going to unpack it for you in a podcast I was on just recently.
So good to be with you, friends. I trust you are doing well. Welcome to the Carrie Abbott Show. If you're new to our listening community, we are so thrilled to have you. Whether you are a person who understands your faith and has been walking with the Lord for a long time, maybe you're new to faith, or maybe you're investigating what it means to be a Christian. You hear a lot of terms, and we have a lot of chaos in the world, and you're looking for peace. You came to the right place, because we try to find answers for you, and if we can't, we will hunt them down and bring them back for you. I'm thrilled to have you with us. Today's conversation is going to be really important, and as many of you know, probably all of you know, there have been a lot of pro-Hamas and anti-Israel protests, not only on college campuses in other places, but they have continued. And the average observer might wonder, why are these administrators allowing this? Why did it take so long for them to respond? What is actually going on here? Well, I brought the right person. Jeff King is with us. He's the president of International Christian Concern, and he actually has an answer to that question. Before I bring him on, I want to remind you, he's traveled to 70 countries, 70. And he's, of course, been interviewed and quoted by most major media. He has inspiring stories to tell. He has a passion for the persecuted, which is really important because there are many people around the whole globe that are persecuted. But he's here to share his insights with us, and I think it's important that we lean into this. Jeff, I want to welcome you to the show. It is an honor to have you.
Carrie, what a blessing it is to be with you.
Well, thank you so much. So first of all, just a 10,000 short view, the organization that you represent, International Christian Concern, how long has it been around, and what is your specific role there?
I'm the president. We've been around 25 years serving the persecuted overseas. And
I know you've got all kinds of ways that you do that. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but you heard me introduce my question, which is why are these college campuses and these administrators waiting so long to respond? Why are they allowing this and sometimes aiding and abetting? And of course, it's shocked a lot of people that our children, our grandchildren, whoever they were on these campuses, all of a sudden really pivoted towards Hamas and anti-Israel sentiment. That was hard for people to take. Can you give us some insight on that?
Well, Carrie, a phrase that comes to mind that I bet you're a fan of is follow the money.
Yes.
So always, right? There's a financial incentive going on, and the scales, there's a finger on the scales, and that is Arab money. So Saudi money, Qatar money, and actually money from China, which is a different influence scheme, has been plowed into American universities. It's supposed to be disclosed. It's been hidden. But the Saudis and the Qataris have funneled about $1 billion a year into America's top universities. And that's gone on for a long time. It's $12 billion just since 2012, $1 billion a year. And they're doing it to the top schools. But it's gone on longer because I was aware of the problem long ago. I mean, probably 15, maybe even 20 years ago, where I was seeing the Saudis do this. And you could see they were making major investments in the very top schools is where it started. So, and then you'd have to see where that money's going. Where do they spend it? And a favorite place for them to spend it is in the Middle East studies departments. And guess what happens there? So that's where coming out of these departments. Does this sound familiar when America is described as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan? You'll see that coming out of the Middle East studies departments. And if that's not a giveaway, nothing is. But anyways, this has been hidden, and the FBI actually got involved, and it was divulged last year in a report. But the universities are hiding it. They're absolutely breaking the law. because for obvious reasons, in a democracy, we want free flow of information. We would welcome foreign investment, but it has to be disclosed. Otherwise, you get into a situation like we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned some reports that have come out, and a lot of people, Qatar keeps coming up in conversation because they're supposed to be sort of helping with negotiations with the hostages. I find that suspect because so many of the Hamas leaders live there, don't they?
They do. So Qatar, for those who don't know, it's such an interesting place. So it's total Arab Gulf money, massive wealth. But these guys are absolutely radical. They support the farthest reach of radical Islam, and a whole bunch of Hamas leaders live there. Where they can't live, they'd be locked up in other places in the Middle East, other Middle Eastern countries. They'd be locked up. And so they have sanctuary there, and Qatar also funds Hamas on a massive scale, and the Palestinians too.
So you're cutting right to the quick of this, which I love. You're being very clear, and you're talking about radical Islamic views that a lot of people, I believe, are afraid to even mention. I remember having conversations with an expert at a local church in the Seattle area. I said, will you come on the show with me and explain to people what they actually think? And he said, I'm afraid to. And I said, did you just say that? Are you serious?
At least he's honest.
Well, right. And this is a really good man and somebody who's courageous, and he did not want to go on air with me to talk about it. So the fact that you're being clear from the beginning, I appreciate. But why are people afraid?
Well, look, just think of the context we're in right now, where people are constantly getting canceled, et cetera, fired, canceled, et cetera. So I long ago, this decision was made for me. I deal with persecution.
Yes, you signed up to be persecuted, right? Or to help those who are persecuted. Yeah.
And how do you describe the problem? How do you explain the problem to the masses if you're going to hide the problem with radical Islam? But a lot of staff, I like to hire and have a big tent philosophy, so I have liberal staff, and they would really chafe at that honesty. It comes from the liberal side of things, where I'm not sure I even understand it, but it's just like, we have to call a spade a spade. We have to bring light to this. That's the only way you shut down the evil.
Right.
And radical Islam is evil, and look, it's got to be exposed, and that's what the FBI was doing.
Right. Well, and we'll go back to that in a moment if we have a chance. I want to go back to the funneling of the money. I know that the Gatestone Institute had a report, Dark Money Nightmare, how Qatar bought the Ivy League. At least 100 American colleges and universities illegally withheld information on approximately $13 billion, which you already mentioned, in undocumented contributions from foreign governments, many of which are authoritarian. And the report states that Qatar makes it possible for these Ivy League universities to claim they've received no funds from the Qatari state because the donations are funneled through a particular foundation. Is that right?
It is. I'm laughing. I think you know why I'm laughing, because it's so disingenuous. It's such a bald-faced lie from the universities. Because the money is coming from the Qatari National Endowment. It's basically their country's trust fund. And so because it's funneled from there, they're saying, well, it's not foreign money. It's just, it's a private investor.
Oh, my.
Oh, my gosh.
Right.
Does not pass the smell test, the sniff test. And honestly, heads need to roll when this is happening. This is corruption at a very deep level. And it's buying of influence by foreign governments that are hostile, even though we have a base in Qatar. But these are hostile governments. They're hostile to democracy. They're hostile to our friends. They are the source of untold suffering in the world by supporting radical Islamist movements throughout the world, the Qataris and the Saudis.
So let's be clear now. We've got these people paying billions of dollars to our so-called elite universities. I don't call them that anymore. But these universities that are training up the next generation of young adults to think. Then these students go in there and they take these courses. What are they learning in these courses?
Well, and that's the irony. Okay, so think about this, and I don't have the exact figures, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get them. I've been digging, but I know a fair amount of the money is going into Middle Eastern studies programs.
I've seen that too.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the irony is that, look, these departments were created in the 50s by the government, at the urging of the U.S. government, and by the military, by the Pentagon, by the intel agencies. We wanted to understand this region that was in the dark to us. We didn't have a lot of expertise or understanding, and so we wanted to produce learned scholars that understood the situation there and all the different dynamics of geopolitics in the region.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it started. So, but at a certain point, now look, in the big picture, just think of what happened in the 70s. And if any listeners too young to know, there was an explosion in the price of oil. So the Arab countries basically been getting robbed by American companies, et cetera, and they took control of the oil, and the price exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did they do with that wealth? Well, I can tell you what they did. The Saudis, the Qataris, and the different Gulf states, what they did was they radicalized the world's Muslims, and they did that through the funding of all kinds of things, through mosques, radical mosques, planting them everywhere, education programs for Muslim leaders, university grants for Muslim universities, madrasas, the boarding schools that create the future fighters for jihad, and then actual radical Islamist terror groups. They recycled all the money we were sending to them, and apart from the massive corruption that the Saudi royals were skimming off the top and buying yachts and everything else, they were radicalizing the world's Muslims, and they did it. They absolutely pulled it off. They shamed any moderates. They drove them out. And so with that is the big picture for what's happened. Now, in addition to that, you can see money has been going into these Middle East study departments and radicalizing them. And so that's where you see language coming out where for instance, they boycotted Israeli universities. This is a university association. There's a Middle Eastern Studies Association. It's all universities. And you can see what happened. They boycotted the universities from Israel. Again, and then you see the language, little Satan, great Satan. Mm-hmm. These are dead giveaways. And again,
yeah, they're kind of clear
where the money's coming from.
Right. Well, and I laugh, and it's not really a laughing issue. It's because it's amusing to me that in a sad way that we've seen this happen really in the open, even though they haven't told us about the money. I know people knew, and of course the people at universities knew, and they were happy to take the money. And these universities have gotten wealthy, and they're cranking out not very intelligent people, unfortunately. But they're basically trying to do what a lot of the public school education in America is trying to do. The in-depth studies show us that the American universities there's about 100 of them, colleges and universities. They have illegally withheld information on this money that's been given to them by Qatar, by the Saudis, and they are promoting a radical Islamic belief system, and we're now seeing it in these protests coming out on the college campuses. And Jeff, I'm so glad that you're with me to answer the question, how could this happen? Because a lot of people who love our country realize these young people do not love our country. They go into these universities and all of a sudden they come out thinking that we are awful. Well, they had to get that message somewhere. And you're basically saying one of the many places would be these Middle Eastern studies or other classes that they have on campus, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you're spreading $1 billion a year around, there's a reason you're doing that, first of all. Mm-hmm. And for the countries in the Middle East, China's a different matter, but for the countries in the Middle East, it is for influence. So again, if you're spending $100 billion and you say, gosh, I think the world of this teacher, any possibility of hiring him, if you're the president of the university, you're going to have a strong interest, at least in looking at this guy.
Yes.
Gal, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to hold your nose if you don't like what they teach. They say, well, we got to keep the money flowing. That's a lot of money.
Wow.
And so you can, so it's not outright corruption. It's influence buying. It's just the way the world works. So you're going to say you're going to have a lot of say in who is hired, what is taught. I'd love to see our government, our friends would love to see this kind of thing being taught. Can we create some new curriculum and new teachers to teach? Yes, we can absolutely do that.
Right.
Can we, we're kind of sensitive about the things that have been said in the past. Can we can you guys be a little more sensitive towards us and not say these kind of things and not support Israel? Yes. Oh my gosh. No, I see your point. So you get the little role play. So this is influence. This is why that money is spent. And then again, what are we seeing when this radicalized content is being fed into students year after year? And the kids, kids are always they're suckers. I use that word loosely. They're suckers for justice.
Yeah, they are.
Right?
Yes.
They care deeply.
They do.
And that's a good thing. And so they, as far as they know, they're doing the right thing, but they just don't have a great understanding of geopolitics or history of the world and how things work and how they're being fed.
And how they're being used, because they are designed truly to have a cause to fight for. Amen. Yeah. And that's supposed to be the gospel, the cause of Jesus Christ, for this cause, right? And there are a lot of causes that are better than this, but we have not raised them that way. We in the church just assumed, well, let's just go along, get along, let him have influence from public schools and other things. And by the way, we'll mention on a Sunday, and we're hoping that we're actually competing. We are failing our next generation because we've allowed them to be lied to. And that, to me, is on us as well. And I don't say that we can take credit for the money that's been spent, but people knew this money was going there. Even if they didn't disclose it, we knew, and nobody stopped it. And I'd love for you to explain just a little further what the extremist Islamic belief system is like. Why is it so dangerous? And do they see Israel and the U.S. the same way?
Definitely not. They do not see Israel the way we see it. Israel is a stain, a scar, and look, the radicals are very clear in what they believe. It should be wiped off the map, and that's the only way to lasting peace in the Middle East. And then you start seeing, you hear these slogans parroted on the campuses. What is it? From the river to the sea. And if you ever hear this phrase, Abby, but for the listeners, what that means is all the land of Israel needs to go away. It needs to be Arab land. So these guys, radical Islamists, are the absolute enemy of what is good in life. That is not a crazy thing to say, of democracy, etc. They believe, so they're very similar to Christians. If you're a fundamentalist Christian, they're going to be very similar, but they're going to have a completely different system, because what did Jesus lay down for us? That we are to win the world, we're to bring his message to the world, and we do it through love and through service. And we show everyone the gentle lamb, and you lift him up, and all will be drawn to him. Well, that is not the deal in Islam. So Islam was started by Muhammad. Muhammad, by reading the holy books, their holy books, you can see he was a very violent man. He led 28 battles, I think, and you can get into some darker stuff about his personality. Yes. And we'll just let people go look that up, and you will be flabbergasted. And most Muslims, by the way, don't understand this. Right. But so he originally was having, he called them vision spells. He wasn't sure what was going on. In fact, he was worried he was possessed, and he talked to his wife, and his wife said, "No, you're a man of God. This is a message of God." And so he set out to try to bring people into this new religion called Islam, and it was a mix of Judaism and Christianity and the pagan religions in Saudi Arabia. And for 10 years he tried and had very little success. After 10 years, he had about 150 followers. And that's when he had a new commandment from God that you could use the sword to bring people under Islam. So you could conquer them, you could kill them. If they resisted you, you could take their wives and do whatever you wanted with them, their daughters, do whatever you want with them, take their gold, take their homes, etc. Now, you can imagine what happened to the faith at that point. Oh, my gosh. And that has been the story of Islam, and they have conquered by the sword everywhere. That's radical Islam.
This might be surprising to people, and I agree with you. We both invite you to go look it up and make sure you get a good source. And if you don't know, please reach out. And of course, you can go to persecution.org and find what they have on their site. And I'm sure there'll be other places where you can get good information. I think it's important that people recognize we're not dealing with somebody that just disagrees with Christianity. They have the same view of Israel that they do of the U.S. and the big Satan, the little Satan, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. In other words, is it really true, Jeff, that they would like Israel wiped off the map, and then would they want the radicals now, not Muslims, but radical Islamist people? Okay, so we're separating the two. Do they really want us wiped out?
And first of all, by the way, I realize I missed your question earlier, but you clarified. That was great. Sorry about that. So, first of all, do they want Israel wiped off the map? And we already established that. Yes, of course. Would they want the U.S. wiped off the map? Well, to explain this to people, a fundamentalist Muslim is very much like a Christian. So very concerned about the righteousness of Allah, or the righteousness of God, that people would be holy and that they would be righteous, and that there is a judgment for sin, and that nations shouldn't conduct themselves in immoral ways. So this is hard for Americans. You need to look at America from the outside, and what does the world see? What do we promote? You know, homosexuality, the killing of babies, etc. So where a Christian would say, well, we need to get to work, we need to spread the love of Jesus, we need to get people to understand his message, that's our call to action, right? Well, their call to action is we need to subjugate, and we need to bring this country under the sword. That is absolutely radical Islam, and that's the history of radical Islam. And this is so shocking to some people, and they might think I'm a bigot. I'm absolutely not. They just need to go study and wake up and understand. And basically, this is what I had to do when I came into persecution.org, and to try to understand what is going on with Islam. That was my first question. And that's why I wrote the book, Islam Uncensored, to really unpack that. And interviewed, I can't remember, 20-some or experts around the world of every stripe. I interviewed radical Islamists, fundamentalist Jews, atheists, people who had left Islam, left Judaism, feminists, etc. I asked them all the same questions about Islam. Ex-CIA director, the son of a Hamas founder. Guess what I found out? Almost across the board, the answers were the same. It didn't matter. I was talking to the most radical leader in the UK, radical Islamist leader in the UK. Most of the people locked up for Islamic terror charges were in his organization. I spoke with him. I spoke with the ex-CIA director and all these other people.
My goodness. The
same message, almost exact across the board, if you know what questions to ask.
And what the same message was, what you're telling us is it's radical. This is what they really believe. This is what they really think. And whatever it takes, the sword or otherwise, they want to subjugate anybody else around them.
Yeah, and a key thing that, Carrie, you're aware of is that, look, part of the doctrine of Islam is that they are at war. So, again, they're just like us. They are a revolutionary movement to subjugate the world. We do it by love. They do it by force. Not just by force, but by deception. It's absolutely they're at war, and when at war, you can lie and deceive the enemy. You should be doing it. If you have an ounce of wisdom, you should be doing that.
Oh, my.
And so... Oh, yeah. So when I was interviewing the radical Islamist in the UK, who's now in prison, by the way, he was so refreshing because he was so honest. I just respected him so much because he was honest.
And it really matters, doesn't it? Honesty is really helpful. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And he was so proud, and he wasn't ashamed. And the deal is, and he would say this, and I already knew this, but I said, why don't more leaders tell the truth? And he said, well, first of all, there is that doctrine, but also they're afraid of getting locked up. So all you have to do is compare an Islamic leader, if he's speaking in the Middle East and if he's speaking out in the West. You compare what he's saying when he's speaking Arabic at home or he's speaking to the West in the press. Completely different.
Hey, Jeff, listen, can you hold over on the break with us? This is so fascinating, and you are giving us such a great class. Jeff is one of the world's leading experts on religious freedom, and in his role as president, he has traveled to 70 countries. Of course, he's been interviewed by a lot of other people. You can tell that he has knowledge that is and has a depth and breadth that we really need to hear from people like this in the current conversation. He's the author of Islam Uncensored. Jeff, that book sounds fascinating, and the people you were able to interview, you said talking to, the last person you talked to was a radical, and he was happy to be honest with you, but he says, a lot of people lie because it's okay to lie. It's okay to lie to promote your faith. That seems antithetical to the idea of faith, doesn't it?
It does, but maybe it's the dividing line, and it's a sharp knife that shows you the distinction between Christianity and Islam. There's so much that's similar, but they're completely different.
Right.
So both of them would be monotheistic. There's a single God. Both of them have a long-term, world-leading, ending eschatology, a viewpoint that we need to bring the whole world under subjugation to the faith. They would do it by the sword. They have done it consistently, and their founder did it by the sword. We do it by love. We are not allowed to do it by violence or hatred.
Right.
And we're actually even called to be victims at times. And
That's right.
Even though it's so unjust, it's so wrong in the short term. Of course, I've seen, now that I've been in persecution for so long, and I've seen the sweep of history with persecution, and even in my 20-some years, I just see the Lord's wisdom in that nothing can stop his church. But it's very different. Christianity and Islam, similar, completely different.
I think it's so important that those of us who care about our Muslim friends and people who have been maybe even mistreated by their own faith, I've talked to some, and some of the beliefs are horrendous, and the idea of subjugating and all the other things that go with it, their view of women, how they treat marriage, their child brides. I could go on. We won't go down that road because, Jeff, you and I could be here all day. This is a conference now. We need to have
show. That's right.
another show, another week of shows. But I wanted to pivot back because you've been so kind to give us more insight, because when we started the conversation, we said there's dark money. There's money coming from Qatar and coming from Saudi Arabia, and these billions are influencing our academics, our universities, and the way they're training up our young men and women. And I believe they are trying to create, in a sense, an army of people who think like they do. Look what happened with Hamas. As soon as that took place, the campuses erupted. Now, I believe they also had outside help and funding and people who organized those protests. It was just too similar in too many places. But the fact that these students were willing means they had just enough indoctrination to misunderstand the true history. Now, let's pivot a little bit here to your organization, International Christian Concern, because you just said something so powerful. You've been in persecution work and ministry for long enough to see God's wisdom in not treating people by subjugating them and harming them and lying to them, but to actually laying down the sword, to loving them and laying down our lives as an offering, in a sense, and sometimes to the point of being a martyr. Explain how you got involved in this and what your organization's doing right now around the world.
Yeah, well, I had been, going back before my current role of 20-some years, I was with Campus Crusade for Christ for 11 years running around the world.
God bless you.
Yeah, and prior to that, I was in banking. So I started out in corporate banking, went
so
into
good.
mortgage banking.
Yeah, I see the connection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you knew to follow the money, right? I mean, that education is not lost on you. This is totally making sense to me now. I love it. Okay, so you got involved after Crew.
Yeah, so I'm at Crew. You have to raise your own financial support. You probably know that, Carrie. And so I did that, and it was so easy for so long, and then all of a sudden I hit the wall and nothing would work.
Interesting.
And for 2 or 3 years, I'm trying, and then suddenly I'm realizing, wait a minute, my calling here has ended. But he wasn't revealing anything. And I'm like, I don't want to go back to secular work. Now, the straw that broke the camel's back that got me into ministry was 1 month I made twice what other people are making in a year.
Oh, my.
I did that in banking.
Wow.
And I was like, it's never going to satisfy. It was a gift because it's like, it's never going to satisfy. I don't care.
Interesting.
I don't care. So I get into ministry, but then, end of crusade. I cannot fix this. There's no money coming in. And I'm just telling the Lord, I'm like, I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what to do. I'm working for you. And so I'm out in California, and I'm out there for meetings with Crusade. And during the night, I have this dream. So everything I'm going to describe to you here is a dream. So I'm talking to an imaginary businessman. I hang up. I'm on the phone. I hang up. I go by his office, and his office is a home, and it is a home it's a classic old 1940s home from Silver Spring, Maryland. And I'm like, oh, that's curious. And all his workers are outside. So again, this is all the dream. I pull up. I'm like, hey, where's Bill? And they're like, Bill's gone. Bill's the guy I was talking to the phone, the head of the organization. Bill's gone. Well, where is he? I was just talking to him. No, he's gone. He's dead, the worker said. I said, he's not dead. I was just talking to him. This is crazy. They said, I'm telling you, he's dead. He dropped dead. We're really scared. Do you want to run the business? I was like, what? So that's it. That's the dream.
Wow.
And that's no more weird than any other dream, right? Because all dreams are weird.
Right.
It's completely random.
You're right.
I'm out in California. I'm from the East Coast. And I wake up and I check my phone, and a long-term supporter and friend called me. And so I called her right back. And she said, Jeff, I'm familiar with this organization. Their founder just dropped dead, and all I can think is you're the guy that's supposed to run this thing. Are you interested?
Out. Oh, I love this.
That's what I said.
That's so good. So good.
That was crazy.
Oh, my good. Well, and how do you refute that? I mean, so your jaw drops, and you think, I'm having one of those moments that people talk about, right, that are unexplainable, except this has to be God.
It's got, And so I'm like everybody else. Like, we're constantly looking for leading and direction.
Yes.
And we get very little, and we stumble through life. This is me. This is everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So having the gift of interpretation, I was able to figure that dream meant that I was supposed to go to ICC. That's a joke, sorry.
Yeah.
But you can't call up the board, Carrie, and say,
right.
By the way, guys, I had a dream. I'm your guy.
Kind of pulling a Joseph. Yeah. Like, who are you? And to call us when you're older. Yeah. It's so good. Right. Yeah.
So I had to wait, and it took a couple months, and they were working things out, and I had to wait. And the whole time, just like, it's very surreal. It's very much theater, and I'm just waiting until I was so pleased once they hired me. I could tell them, I said, I've been dying to tell you something. And, of course, they were overjoyed because these are men of faith and men of God that really wanted, they wanted his will and they wanted his pick. So that's how I got into it.
Such a great story.
And I come into this organization. I don't know much about persecution. And and this might lead into our next show, but I just am wondering why am I called to this? Because at heart, I'm an evangelist. At heart, I'm a guy that calls people to revival. I'm like, and people don't like persecution. It involves blood and death and suffering. Mm-hmm. So it's hard. And I'm like, I saw it right away. And I just said, but at the same time, the Lord kept whispering to me over and over and over. He said, I want you to listen to the persecuted church. I want you to learn their lessons and the martyrs. These are life-changing lessons, and I want you to shout them to the world. And this message, Carrie, was clear as day. So, today I'm doing an interview on Islam and stuff because, look, when you deal with persecution, you become an expert on Islam.
Yes.
But that whisper was really most of my communication. It's the life-changing principles that the persecuted are teaching us. Why are they decimated? Why do they go through so much abuse and torture? And they're not only faithful, they're the most in love with the Lord, and they're the fastest-growing church. And once you figure that puzzle out and the why, you understand so much about the faith and why the church can never be defeated.
So good. It does make sense, but unless you hear the story or experience it yourself, persecution we have a lot of things that get that title. When you say persecuted, you define that for us to make sure, because a lot of people feel persecuted, and they're Westerners who have great lives and they had to wait in line to get, do a self-checkout instead of somebody doing it for them. And I'm saying that as a joke, but not really.
Oh, no, it's fun, and I enjoy it. I love the background and the wisdom behind that question. Because when we deal with persecution, there's lots of stuff that we're dealing with here in the West or here in the States, and these are kind of the beginning stages of we're treated poorly, we're hated,
canceled,
we're fired, you get out of the public square. So, but we deal with the hard stuff overseas, the really nasty stuff. So it's torture, it's murder, it's rape, it's just all the horror of persecution.
Okay, and that's a stunning, stark contrast to how we live here. We have people listening who have been involved in Christian service and ministry and have been missionaries. So I know a lot of our people are nodding and understanding. Who's doing the persecuting, and what's the belief behind the persecution happening, would you say, in the majority of the situations?
Well, I'd say there's probably, if we really had to simplify, there's probably three legs to stool. And one is, look, as human beings, we dislike and we fear that which is different. So that's kind of a cultural thing. And the religion, if you come from another religion, that is mixed in there. So, but it used to be, the old story of persecution was the Marxist states. And they're still around. They're still doing their dirty work, but it's much decreased. So you still, in Cuba, in China, in different places, you're still seeing persecution. Nicaragua, Venezuela, et cetera. But the rise, go back to what I said earlier, when the wealth of the world poured into the oil states in the 70s, and what did they do with that? They recycled that money into all those things I mentioned earlier, into radical madrasas, radical mosques, planting them. Anyone in the West here in the United States can look around and say, I never used to see mosques. They're everywhere now. Guess where that money's coming from? That's coming from the Saudis. And they were doing that overseas, and they were pushing out any moderate Muslims and making fun of them and bringing everyone back to junkets to Saudi Arabia to be trained how to think properly with radical Islam. And then they were expanding radical Islamist terror groups. And so you see so much of what's going on. There was an explosion of radical Islamic violence, of Middle East terror groups, but it was going farther than that. It was everywhere and exploded in persecution as well.
My goodness. Okay, I've already asked you to stay with us once, but I'm just going to ask again. Any chance we can keep you for a few more minutes, because I have 3 more questions for you.
I am dying to come back.
I really praise God for how He is raising up leaders, and then it's a big chessboard, and He's moving people around on that chessboard in order to fulfill His kingdom promises to everyone. And wow, just so appreciate people like that. So yes, be praying for them, get involved in that. Interesting article to tie into this from Lieutenant Colonel Alan West at townhall.com titled "Our Islamic Terrorist Supporting President." So this is his thoughts on this, and I think these tie together rather interestingly. He says at the beginning of this article, by the way, he says, listen, just so we are clear, the title of this missive is about our current president. However, this is not something new, since the current president was the vice president for an individual, Barack Hussein Obama, who also carried this title. No, this is not sensational, hyperbolic rhetoric. Consider that early on in his tenure as president, Obama spoke at the University of Cairo in Egypt and invited members of the Muslim Brotherhood front and center. If you're not familiar with the Muslim Brotherhood, perhaps you should read the explanatory memorandum for their strategic operations in North America. This document was written in 1991 by one Mohammed Akram and found during an FBI raid in 2004 in Northern Virginia. It was translated and produced as evidence in the largest Islamic terrorist funding trial, the Holy Land Foundation case in Houston, Texas in 2008. It was Obama who released the 5 senior members of the Taliban from Gitmo to Qatar. It was Obama who created an ill-advised vacuum in Iraq, with the full withdrawal of U.S. forces, leading to the rise of ISIS. Joe Biden referred to that as one of the greatest foreign policy decisions. And he mentions here that that man has never been right on any foreign policy decision. That's Lieutenant Colonel Alan West saying this in this article. He says, okay, so there are those who will say that Obama got Osama bin Laden. Well, actually, Navy SEALs did that. But somehow, mysteriously, under Obama's watch, Extortion 17 happened, the greatest loss of life for SEAL Team 6 in Afghanistan. Still, to this day, no one has been held accountable. I don't know if you know about that story. We'll address it at another time. That is an interesting contrast that he paints here. And he says, in a clear contrast, just consider how the leftist media responded to former President Trump's killing of Soleimani and Baghdadi, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Quite telling when you contrast the two stories, and he's absolutely right there. And so this goes on to talk about the fact that Joe Biden who is continuing in this third Obama term. Not my comment, but Colonel West says this. Now, isn't it interesting how many people just say that? It just rolls off our tongues as if we've all just decided that's actually what this is. It didn't take very long for that to happen either. I find that really interesting. So here you have a man that we all admire, and he's not loose-lipped. So I point this out for a reason. The fact that he says it rolled off his tongue onto the pen or the computer and landed in this article, I think is really interesting. So he says Joe Biden, who's continuing in this third Obama term with the appeasement, sympathies, support to, and enabling of Islamic terrorism. Joe Biden's insidious surrender debacle in Afghanistan enabled the return of those 5 senior Taliban leaders whom Obama had released. We have recently witnessed Biden taking the side of Hamas, a vile Islamic terrorist organization, as Israel pushes for their destruction in their final stronghold, Rafah. How could any American president in their right mind, he says, justify withholding arms and support to an ally fighting unilaterally against a designated terrorist organization that has the blood of Americans on their hands? He writes in this article and asks a really important question. Yeah, why has Biden not forcefully condemned these pro-Hamas demonstrations across America, including the ones we see on these college campuses that we were just discussing? His position of moral equivalency and relativism only bodes to encourage the Islamic jihadist supporters. Colonel West says, I am still waiting for foreign students supporting Hamas, meaning Muslim Brotherhood, to have their student visas revoked and to be deported. That would send a clear message. That's interesting. I've heard that from others. I wonder if that would be a possibility. But the most recent revelation serves, sadly, once again to remind us that for this current president, leftist ideological agendas are more important than our national security, and yes, even when those agendas support Islamic terrorism. Last week, we learned that weeks ago, on or about May 3rd, 2 Jordanian illegal immigrants had sought to gain access to U.S. Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia. These individuals had entered our republic illegally, aided and abetted by the open border policy of Biden-Obama. Notice he puts the two together here. Again, I'm not adding that. That's what he's saying. I find this fascinating because this is what you would call a hard-hitting piece in the sense that he's not hoping you get to read between the lines. He's just saying it like it is. He goes on to say somehow they were resourced and set up with a truck to supposedly deliver services onto the base there at Quantico. They disobeyed directives and sought to freely drive onto the base. The American people did not find out about this until about 2 weeks later, and some of you are nodding. You remember hearing the question being raised, and when they did ask the question, there was very little information given, which just makes it all very suspect, right? How many other Islamic terrorist operatives have come across our border illegally? How many of them are part of the almost 2 million people that we refer to as, quote, gotaways? How many of them are part of the insidious and unconstitutional Biden free flight asylum program, which is loading up and flying illegals straight into our country? Why has Biden told ICE that they are not to do their prescribed mission of seeking out and deporting those in America illegally, and especially in the case of single military-age males? You probably do know this, but in case you didn't, I want to go back to this, that they are literally flying people into all over the country, bypassing the border. And who said that was okay? And how is that set up? And why is that set up? Truly, we have raised the level of concern now, and everyone paying attention to me now, and those who will listen at whatever time you listen, this is no longer the thing that we hope someone else takes care of. You need to recognize that they're landing in your state. They're landing in your cities. They're sleeping somewhere. And if the worst took place, what would that be? This is not in the article. This is me adding to that. If people are being sent here for some sort of disruption, some sort of an assault, they're coming in without any information. We have no idea who they are. Are they coming in with good intent or bad intent? We have to lean towards bad intent. Otherwise, they'd be coming legally, which we would be happy to receive them, right? Then I'm going back to the article here. The Biden administration owes an explanation to the American people on the infiltration track that these two Jordanian illegal immigrants, Islamic jihadists, took. We need to know who provided them with material support and aid and comfort. We have seen how many criminal illegal immigrants commit crimes against Americans, including the most recent and infamous Laken Riley of Georgia. We need to ask a very simple question of Joe Biden. In a world where you just restored an Islamic terrorist sanctuary, Afghanistan, why would you push for a wide open border entry into the United States of America? There is only one response. Remember, this is from Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. He understands lawfare, warfare. He knows how this all works. The Biden administration's rationale is a continuation of Obama's policy of supporting Islamic terrorism. Yes, he says, harsh words, but true. How many billions of dollars have Obama and Biden facilitated to the coffers of the number one state sponsor of Islamic terrorism, Iran? Just as a reminder, during the Trump administration, Iran was practically bankrupt with less than $10 billion in cash reserves. Groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, Jihad, and the Houthis were holding bake sales and lemonade stands to raise funds. Now that our Islamic terrorism supporting president has refilled Iran's financial coffers, these terrorist organizations are back in business. They are obviously able to finance Islamic jihadists to link up with the other criminal terrorist organizations and cartels to gain illegal entry into America. Recent polling indicates that this is not a priority issue for leftists, meaning Democrats going into the 2024 election cycle, for them, dismembering babies in the womb up to the time of birth is their preeminent issue. Interesting. The Democrat Party is in full alignment for political purposes with Islamic terrorists who have no issue of beheading and baking Jewish babies in ovens on October 7th. Yes, this is a hard-hitting article. He is not pulling any punches. He says, I choose life, and I certainly do not choose to support Islamic terrorists and jihadists being able to by an open borders policy. Never forget, all the Islamic terrorist attacks we faced on our soil in the Obama years, we will experience the same if Obama gets a fourth term. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, he went for it, didn't he? Hard-hitting, factual, true. We'll link you to that article at the end of the week. Such an important conversation we had today with Jeff King, followed up by this great article. So good to be together. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in. It's always good to be together. We want to encourage you in every way we can. Remember to go to thelegacyinstitute.com to sign up for the Truth Campaign. We need your support and your help and your prayer, and we'll see you next time.